Hey folks on the call, I just dropped a document into the chat, and that's a notes doc that you all can take notes in. You can put your info, name, organization, email in there, and then also there is a section of that document with some links to resources that we'll be talking about today. Maybe one more minute, and then Michaela will get us kicked off.
Should I just go ahead?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Ethos Launchinar. I'm Michaela Parker, founder and executive director of the Academic Data Science Alliance, and I have stolen a few minutes from this webinar to tell you a little bit about us, ADSA, the Academic Data Science Alliance, and then we'll get started. So who are we? We're a community building organization that supports university researchers and educators to learn, use, and teach data-intensive methodologies, and most importantly, responsible applications. This QR code on this slide will take you to our website where you can learn more about our events, activities, and how to become a member. We are, for all intents and purposes, a professional society for academic data science, and we're fiscally sponsored by community initiatives. But we are also all of you, that is to say, a community of data science researchers and educators who take responsibility for a just, equitable future, where data science approaches are thoughtfully applied in all domains for the benefit of all. As a community organizing group, we have lots of events, activities, meetings, workshops, but I wanted to draw your attention in particular to our first ever in-person annual meeting. It will be hosted at the University of Texas at San Antonio this fall, October 24th through 26th. There's also an optional workshop day on the 27th. And right now we have a call for sessions open on our website. So if you would like to run a session that has lightning talks or a panel discussion or breakout or birds of a feather, please consider submitting a proposal to our meeting. The link is on the website, and the theme for all of our annual meetings is Future Leaders for Responsible Data Science. But this year, because we'll be in San Antonio, we're going to have a special session and keynote on the topic of health, well-being, and the arts. So we encourage, of course, those sessions with that topic in mind. I also wanted to just say that if you're unfamiliar with ADSA, we do run a data science community newsletter. We also have a monthly newsletter that's all about us and our activities. We have a mailing list, member directories, member book, of course, website and social media. So please check us out. And I do want to draw special attention to this newsletter. If you're unfamiliar with it, it is a wonderful summary of data science at the intersection with academia. It's written almost exclusively by our managing editor, Laura Noreen, and our producer, Brett Stenger. And of course, we have ADSA staff that support this effort as well. This giant QR code will take you to the sign up for the newsletter, but in that sign up form, there's also a link to the archives if you want to kind of check it out before you commit to signing up. And finally, some logistics for today. So this event, as all of our events, is guided by our code of conduct, which you can find on our website linked in the footer. Our code of conduct helper for today is myself. You are welcome to message me directly in the chat, or you can also find an anonymous form on our code of conduct webpage if anybody makes you feel uncomfortable or unwelcome during this event. As you may have noticed, this event is being recorded, so please stay muted while our speakers are presenting. And if you do have questions, we really encourage you to use the chat feature. You can drop resources in there as well to share with other participants. And finally, we gratefully acknowledge that we are living and learning on the shared and largely unceded traditional territories of Native peoples who have cared for these lands, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. So with that, I'll just note that this recording will be hosted on our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in checking out any of our other recordings and virtual events, they're all hosted there. This is a different QR code now. I'll take you to YouTube. As an example, we run a monthly career panel focusing on data science at the intersection of different domains in the career. So I'm just showing here the example of data journalism. And I think that's all I have. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Steve.
Great, thank you. Let me kind of sort things out on my screen here. Michaela, can you let people in as they come and maybe drop the notes in the chat a few more times? Excellent. So quick introduction for me. I'm Steve Van Tile. I'm a program manager with Academic Data Science Alliance. And part of what I do in my work is help shepherd along projects that the academic data science community calls on ADSA to take on sometimes. So, and the Data Science Ethos is one such project. So let me talk a little bit about the background of this project. I think it's important to note how we got to where we are, how we got to creating this data science ethos. And then we will jump into a tour of the Data Science Ethos site, and then can have a little bit of discussion if we'd like to. So how did we get to where we are? So for many years, I think we all recognize that the data science and more broadly the computing research and practitioner space has been there's been a call for a little bit more of ethical thinking in this work that we do. You know, the headlines are pretty constantly plastered with examples of applications of computing tools that maybe have been applied in a way that makes people scratch their heads or throw up some question marks about the ethics of such an application. And so ADSA put together a working group to try to help address some of these issues in the data science community. Now, the working group initially was launched as a working group to build a code of ethics for data science. That felt like a very noble thing to try to do. And so we put together this working group of social scientists and humanists and data scientists to kind of help us think about how to take an ethical approach to data science. And in that first meeting, members of the working group said, please do not create a code of ethics for data science. Nobody needs another code of ethics. We don't even think that codes of ethics typically do much. They're sort of virtue signaling. And that working group very quickly came to the conclusion that one of the things that we needed was a better way to talk about ethics in the context of the research process. And so we launched into putting together a framework for thinking about ethical application of data science. And the working group kind of started on that. I would like for a moment to hand things over to Catherine Carson, professor of history. Is that correct, Catherine, at UC Berkeley, to talk a little bit about the development of this kind of intellectual framework for the data science ethos. And then we will come back and talk about the tool itself. So Catherine, go ahead if you, I don't know if you have slides or you're just going to chat, that would work too.
No.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, everyone who's been involved in this process to get us here. And thank you all for joining as we discuss the next stage of this data science ethos tool. It comes out of a decade, really, of embedded interdisciplinary work of social scientists and humanists embedded with data science in both research settings and also in teaching. And one very deliberate outcome of that decade of embedding is that the focus of this tool, Data Science Ethos, is very firmly on practice. What in real life work in practice we do. And we all know that repeated practice is what leads to skilled action and also just daily routinized action, what becomes part of our core, which is why a tool to practice with on social responsibility and ethics is really a great way to learn and to learn more. So the tool that you'll hear about today makes use of, we can call them lenses from the social sciences and humanities to address the different stages of data science work that are worked out in case studies. And the lenses that are at the core of the project really distill a broad range of research traditions in the social sciences and humanities, really taking them down to their foundations. These lenses capture broadly recognized fundamental aspects of how the human world and the social world works. And a key point here is the lenses are general, so they can be expected to be useful in just about any data science setting. This is really meant to make them adaptable to new circumstances and problems rather than focused on a problem that we've already learned to identify. And there is a paper that we can share that provides more of the intellectual background for the tool, the disciplinary traditions it grows from. But for the purposes of you all on this webinar, the goal of the tool is really to show how these conceptual lenses on the social world can be integrated into daily practice in ways that point to the opportunities to take action towards responsibility and justice in each kind of new situation that a data scientist finds them in. So the end goal of the tool, to come back to the beginning, is that routine data science workflows can be really constructively merged with social and ethical analysis in ways that lead to better outcomes in a reliable and skilled and day-by-day way. So that's the kind of the intellectual motivation behind the tool. And with that, I'll pass it back to the team to speak in greater depth about the tool itself.
Great, thank you, Catherine. I'm going to start sharing my screen, so please squawk if you don't see my screen in a second. Great, so you should be able to see my screen.
Can see it.
Lovely. And I'm going to look over there sometimes because that's where the screen is. So I may not be looking in the camera the whole time. So yeah, thank you, Catherine, for that background. I think it's really important to kind of think about where this is coming from, and it didn't just get pulled out of a hat. It got pulled out of a hat that has been worn for over a decade by humanists and social scientists and data science who've been thinking about these issues. So as Catherine mentioned, there's a paper that kind of describes this intellectual framework. That paper is linked in the notes document under the resources section. So you can take a look at that to get a deeper understanding of that foundation. But after building that foundation, our working group, we were essentially at the point of needing to implement such a conceptual foundation and build a tool that could actually be used by data scientists and instructors and learners. And luckily, we had the assistance of Charlotte Mazel-Kabas. I probably have pronounced her name wrong because I don't have a French accent. But Charlotte really pulled on all of the threads and tightened up the content of the tool and helped with the design of the site so that we could get to a useful tool in the end. I do want to take 1 second to point out first the About link on the homepage of the tool. There's a lot of information about the background of the Data Science Ethos tool. And towards the bottom of this About page are some credits for all the folks who have worked on this over the years, including working group members, folks who have piloted these concepts in the classroom, students and professionals who have helped us with the design work, and so on. And if you're on this call or if you see this recording and we've forgotten to put your name in that list, please let me know, because we wanted to make sure to acknowledge everybody who helped us out along the way. Okay, so a tool. So we've talked about the intellectual foundation of the data science ethos, and now let's talk about the implementation and the tool that we've created. So I'm going to do the most dangerous thing you can do in a webinar, which is a live tour. And if something goes wrong, I apologize. But when you come to the Data Science Ethos site, this is where you land. You land on kind of a classic homepage with some navigation across the top and some text on the homepage here about to help you kind of direct where you need to go. So we've heard from Catherine just a moment ago about lenses. We've heard about the stages of the research process and kind of how what we're doing here is merging the workflow with those social and ethical lenses. And then we've heard about the case studies, and I'm going to jump into each of these individually. I do want to point out also alongside the About section, there is a How This Works section of the site that can help you kind of walk through step by step if you're new to the site and need a little bit of guidance. So what I want to do is I want to jump into each of these three sections and talk about them. So first I want to go to the lenses page of the site. So again, as mentioned, the lenses are structured ways of thinking about the social and ethical contexts relevant to the research process and specifically relevant to each stage of the research process. For this project and for this product, we've identified 4 lenses that feel right. They feel like we're kind of looking kind of through the right lenses for the problems at hand. And I'll do a quick introduction now to what those 4 lenses are. But each of these pages, each of these lenses has a whole page with some pretty in-depth information about the lens, kind of where it comes from, and how it can be applied in the context of research. So on the lenses page, we have the 4 lenses, and they are positionality, which is an expression of the diversity of human experience and how each person's situation is shaped by their environment. We have the lens socio-technical systems, which is essentially how technology and society interact with one another and how that may affect our outlooks. The third lens is power. This is about asymmetries in agency, or what kind of agency an individual has, and how that affects what they do or how they see the world. And the last one is narrative. So what is the dominant discourse, and what are some alternate narratives that might be out there about the work that we're doing? So as I've mentioned, these are all, there's more detail for each of these lenses on each of those pages. But if you take a look here, you can get kind of an overview sense for what the lenses are. Now, I suspect that for a lot of folks who aren't embedded in the social sciences and humanities, that this concept of lenses is a little bit foreign. But as we go along, we might be able to kind of like lock into what they mean and how we can use them in this context. So to scaffold on to lenses, we're going to go talk about the stages. Now, the stages of the research process is something that a lot of us are very familiar with. We're oftentimes taught about research in the context of what's sometimes called the research lifecycle model, which includes stages like question identification and development, data discovery, exploratory data analysis, interpreting your analysis, and then sharing that out to the world. And we've captured those stages of the research process here and tried to visually on the screen there indicate that each of those stages is iterative with all of the other stages. We all know that when we're doing exploratory analysis, we may, for example, realize that initial analysis might change the questions that we're asking. So we iterate back to the question stage of the research process. Or it may impact, our need to collect more data, for example. So the sort of squiggly lines on this model diagram help us to understand those interactions among the stages. And at each stage, we have an overview description of what's happening in the research process at that stage. As you can see here, we have at each stage some indication of how that stage may be interwoven with other stages of the research process to kind of indicate that iterative nature and that interactive nature of the stages. And then at each stage, we bring those lenses back, right? So we're trying to scaffold the lenses back on. So we talk about question and problem identification here. How do we figure out what questions to ask in our research process? How do we find a question that's not too big, but not too narrow to ask to effectively conduct some research? And then we say, okay, let's think about this stage of the research process through these lenses that we've talked about. So in the tool, in this overview section on the research stages, we present each of the lenses and prompting questions or comments about how that looking through that lens may affect the way that you look at that stage of the research process. So, for example, positionality. We may ask ourselves how the researcher's identity experiences and personal situation impact their understanding of the research project, and how the identity experiences and personal situations of stakeholders for the project may also affect question and problem identification. Similarly, knowledge and skills, culture, race, and gender, these are all ways that our individual experiences can affect the outlook on the research we're doing. And as I've mentioned, each of those four lenses is presented with each of these phases of the research process to help prompt that, that merging of workflow with social and ethical analysis. And again, we're still in an overview section of the site here. You can see that each stage has its own page with all of the elements that I've described. So when we're first visiting the site, we can come to this introductory section of stages and look at the stages with each of the lenses and context and try to get an overview. Now, I think importantly, the site has this third major element, which are these case studies. So the site is launched with 3 case studies. They each provide an example of how real-world research projects can benefit from integrating these social and ethical concepts through the lenses. And we'll get back to contributing case studies in a little bit here, but I want to walk you through what each of these case studies looks like. So we start with these 3. The first one is a case study about estimating populations with cell phone records, right? So this case study is essentially an introductory case study to kind of help folks new to the tool understand that interaction of the case study with the lenses and the stages. So at each case study, we have a summary of the case with some information about the nature of the problem that we're talking about, and some background. Each case study has a link to a longer narrative that captures the entire case study in the lenses. And then we get down to this life cycle stages and lenses area of the case study, where for each stage, again, this should look familiar, for each stage, we have information under the lenses about things that we might consider or ways that we might think about this research problem through the lenses. And these narratives under the lenses take the form of either just prose that's kind of talking about the lenses and how they apply to this stage of the research process. And oftentimes there are also prompting questions in here that can kind of get you thinking about that lens stage combination in the context of this research problem. So to jump back, there are 2 other case studies. One is called Paying Your Share, which is essentially a data journalism project that has come out of a couple of major cities in the US about unfair tax practices and how they may be affecting people of historically underrepresented groups negatively. So again, this case study has a summary, link to a full story of the case study, and then we can jump into the stages with their lenses. And then last, the third case study here is called Crowd the Tap, which is based on a citizen science project funded by the US EPA to promote access to safe drinking water by empowering individuals and groups to investigate their plumbing infrastructure, essentially. So thinking about, again, the stages of that research process and how we can use the lenses to interrogate the work that we're doing at every stage of the research process. I mentioned earlier, there's a how this works page. It's got some kind of overview information about how to engage with the tool. And then there's an about page here that has information about the background of the project and who was involved. So that
There's a question in the chat. I don't know if you're ready to take it.
Yeah, I don't have my chat up. Oh, there is a question. Lovely. I guess I should have been watching that. Megan asks, has the toolkit been tested with non-human or community impact research or data? For example, threatened species and habitats. So the answer is not in any kind of formal way, right? We have these 3 case studies that are very human, in a lot of ways, very human focused. And one of the things that we want to do is to expand the number of case studies to sort of broaden the domains of research and types of work that we're addressing here. And I think we're especially interested in case studies where it may not seem like there is a big ethical or social aspect to the research, although we know that all research has an ethical and social aspect. So we want to find case studies to include in the tool here that can really cover more breadth than we have now. So yeah. Oh, lovely. Megan, I would love to talk to you about particular case studies you might have in mind that could help illustrate these issues for those engineers that are having a hard time making the leap. That's a great transition, though, because this is sort of an introduction to the tool in a nutshell, and where things stand currently at launch. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what comes next, right? So I'm going to jump off of sharing. So what comes next? We are interested in 2 major aspects of what comes next. The first is how can we engage with you, potential users, to talk about using the tool in a learning setting, either in a classroom or some kind of training environment that you might have, where it would be useful to talk through these social and ethical dimensions of the research that you're conducting or that you may be conducting. So we're interested in hearing from you if you are hoping to use a tool like this in the classroom. The second engagement that we'd like to have with you is around case studies and contribution of more case studies. We just talked a little bit about how we recognize that the breadth of case studies here is pretty limited, and we'd like to extend that reach so that we can have relevant case studies for more types of researchers. One of the things that we have heard early on is that, and we've heard it in other contexts too, is that sometimes it can be hard for researchers to make a domain jump when they're talking about theoretical things like this, and it's very helpful to have something that's very applied to the work that they actually do, instead of talking to an engineer about ecological research. We'd like to be able to talk to an engineer about engineering research, for example. So if you have case studies or ideas about case studies that would be helpful, we would love to hear from you and work with you to develop those to incorporate into the tool. Charlotte, I don't know, Charlotte, who I mentioned earlier, has been working quite a bit on the 3 case studies that we have in the tool now. And I don't know, Charlotte, if you have any words you'd like to say about development of case studies or kind of what that process looks like,
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to answer your question and maybe Karen's question in the chat, what constitutes a good case study? I think all case studies are good. That's really the bottom line. What we're trying to do here is to develop a story that help you as a researcher and the people who's going to read the case study understand what are the way these ethical questions are really interwoven with the data science workflow that you're developing. So it's not about, you know, a good or a bad case study. It's a way that we're going to develop it with you and help you untangle this question and make them readable for a larger audience, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, and we've had some examples of interesting case studies come through that might be helpful to talk about. A couple of examples from the natural sciences, as mentioned in the question earlier. Do we have any case studies that don't involve humans? Obviously, all of these research questions involve humans because the researchers, at the very least, we think are human. But another example of a case study that has been suggested to us is to take some of these historical research projects that have had major ethical questions attached to them and to develop case studies out of those. So an example would be the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. We could build a case study out of that. And that's sort of a touch point for a lot of people who are starting to think about ethics in research, and certainly in human subjects research. We talk about that case a lot. So those are a couple of examples, but we would love to hear from you about anything that you have in mind that has been part of the research that you yourself conduct, or if you're teaching about ethics in social contexts in your data science or research classes. If you're already using a case study in that context, we'd love to incorporate it into the tool. Any other questions from the audience, or thoughts or considerations you'd like us to take in? It's quiet out there. I assume everyone is just busy reading through case studies. And Torbit, do you have a question?
Yeah, so one thought in teaching ethics, you want to teach it within a domain. So I'm thinking, how universal will the tool be, or would the tool be refined for, more for certain sets of domains that, if you're going to teach ethics, it's easy to do, like maybe have a standalone ethics course, also teach ethics within your domain courses. As well, like, having this interdisciplinary data science education, I'm recommending co-teaching courses, having a computer scientist, a statistician, a domain person to implement the data science methods for that domain, as well as the ethical implications. So I'm thinking, how different would the tool maybe be for different case studies? Or as you get more case studies from different domains, you can see how universal the tool will be, or how refined it might want to be for different tweaks on the tool for different domains I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our hope has been from the beginning that at least the overview sections of the tool, where we talk about the lenses at a high level, and we talk about the stages of the research process at a high level, will be generalized enough that folks who are doing research can kind of latch onto that, right? Like, we all, with the stages, certainly can latch onto the idea of exploratory data analysis and talk about that in a general way that I think everybody can, who's in this research space, can kind of capture. The place where we really feel like we hone in on the details of domain-specific research is in the case studies. And so as we think about what case studies to incorporate, that's where we want to engage with the broader community to say, to have you tell us, look, these case studies don't work for an engineering audience. And so we would love then to work with you or others to build out engineering case studies, or at least an engineering case study, so that we can say, okay, this is a case study that we feel like folks in this broad domain can latch onto and understand kind of in the context of the type of research they do. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, so it sounds like the case studies, are definitely going to be an extension of the tool. And then, maybe with more case studies, do you go back and revise the tool for different areas to be determined, I guess, right?
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. We've had interest in the tool from across domains, but also like down and up in the stack of education, right? So we've already had a little bit of engagement with folks who are teaching data science at the high school level. We've had engagement with folks who are running research labs and want to use the tool as a way to talk about these issues in the context of the research that their lab does. So it's not always a classroom setting. And what we're hoping for is feedback. We want this to be a living tool that grows as we get a better sense for what users' needs are going down the road. So where are we at with questions in the chat? I see.
I think Karen's was the most.
Karen's is the next one?
Yep.
Well, Karen just says that she loves what we've done. So thank you, Karen.
No, she wants you to role play.
She wants me to role play?
Well, I inserted you.
Oh yeah, that would be great. I would love to talk about how to do that. That would be an interesting approach to this way of fusing the life cycle with our ethical analysis. Megan asks another question, curious about the choice of labels data science and not just science. Yeah, so we struggled with this early on. We talk about the data science workflow, and we talk about these lenses in the context of data science. And we could just say that this is the way that we should think about research. This should be a research ethos rather than data science. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you sit, we are the Academic Data Science Alliance. So we thought we would narrow the scope initially so that we're talking to our community. But there isn't a reason that you couldn't take this tool and its case studies and apply them outside of data science. It's all, the concepts are all solid, on solid footing. Michaela, question?
Yeah, I just have to admit somebody. There we go. Speaking to that same, I received that very same question when I presented this work at AGU fall meeting. And I was part of a group that's developing guidelines for ethical AI and machine learning. And I think as a group, we wanted to point out, and this is probably extends to data science too, that what we can do with data and machine learning and AI is so much more, it has such greater power. It has greater power to uncover new thoughts, new knowledge, but also to impact people in ways that we haven't ever been able to before. And so I think this tool, some of the prompting questions and the lenses really speak to that aspect of data science, right? That there's the capability with vast amounts of data and with the tools that we now have in hand to really enable discovery that couldn't happen before, but at the same time also have incredible detrimental impact on communities and populations. And so it's kind of a different way of thinking about science. And I think that this tool sort of helps with that too, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. question from Carolyn Coward. Will the tool and lenses be revised periodically? That's the idea, right? So we may, as you say, identify new ways of reflecting on the research process that we want to incorporate, stages of the research process that maybe we have glossed over or left out, and things like that. And so as we move forward with development of case studies and have folks actually implementing the tool in a classroom or an instruction setting, we really want to hear back how that went. We would really love to hear back in those cases also, any lesson plans that you might be willing to share for how you've used the tool in the classroom, to give other folks a springboard for launching off into their own classrooms with this tool. So yeah, we are, as I mentioned before, thinking about this as a living product, and we'll be revising as the community suggests we revise. Is there another question in the chat? No. So we still have some time for questions or discussion. Happy to take those now, or to take them by email or through the feedback form that we have on the site. Excellent comment in the chat there, Carolyn. Thank you. So any additional thoughts or questions, or it sounds like maybe folks want to take a little time to engage with the tool, share it with their friends and colleagues, and think about how it might be useful in your context or how you might contribute back. We'd love to hear from you. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, I'm seeing a lot in the chat about AI and machine learning now, and I'm wondering, this is such a branding thing to say, but is it helpful if we add those words, right? To me, data science is kind of the umbrella over which AI, machine learning, all these tools that we use, they are just tools under the umbrella of data science. But I don't even know that we say the word artificial intelligence or machine learning anywhere on this site. But I know that a lot of people, that's what they're using for their tools right now, and it's very buzzwordy. And that's what students want to learn, and that's where they want to get their jobs. And I guess that's not a question. Maybe it is.
It's more of a cormorant.
Should we sprinkle?
Yeah, we may want to talk a little bit more about AI and ML here. I share some reluctance with you, Michaela, to incorporate too many specific tools or tool categories. But that would be great to hear feedback from folks if they think that would be a useful step to take. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. This recording will go up on our YouTube fairly soon, I think, and I will share the recording back out to folks who registered. So you'll see an email from me on that front in maybe a few days. But please do share the tool itself, the notes document, or the video when you receive it with your colleagues. And we really would love to engage with you on the tool and how we can improve it or how you're using it. So thank you all for coming today. It's been a delight, and we'll see you out there on the internet.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. There's some really good things in the chat.
Yeah, it seems
Howard
like
is fantastic, by the way. I don't know if you know her, Catherine, but
she's
at
from
NASA, JPL. I know, but she's really into this. It's awesome.
That
So
is
Catherine, I
awesome.
would like to say that as a non-humanist social scientist or data scientist, I hope that I did some level of justice to all the work everyone's done over the years. But I think we're
I think
at a good point now.
I think we're all really grateful to you, Steve, not to
Oh.
mention Michaela and Charlotte, from those of us who have been working on this. I mean, it's just amazing to see it come to fruition. And it would be really cool to be able to provide both more case studies and more lesson plans, because
Yeah.
I really know how once I can persuade my colleagues that, like, yes, you can look at the website, then I can see it getting used.
Yeah.
And having people like explain how they use it in some kind of teaching
Mhm.
section seems like a really great opportunity.
Yeah, and we have a proposal out right now I don't even remember what it's called, Michaela remembers.
The tools competition.
Yeah, there's
Learning agency. It was in the
group
learning
called the
agency.
Learning Agency, which is are they a nonprofit that does educational research and funding. And so we've got a proposal out to them to talk about implementation of this tool at the high school level, because that's kind of where they're focused. And we know that a lot of high schools are starting to move towards teaching data science or statistics. So this would be useful there. But I really would like to also engage at the undergraduate education level as soon as possible, so that we can start to build out the library of case studies. And I think that the lesson plans would be so helpful. With anything like this, it's just useful to be able to see how somebody else has used it, and
yeah, it's probably just a snowball effect too, then, right? Like, if you have a few case studies and a few lesson plans, and people tend to use it and contribute, and yeah,
that's the hope. So
you see, Torbit is sitting in the waiting room.
I'm not letting Torbit in. This webinar is over. he can
He's in it the whole time. I don't know why he left.
No, he was. Yeah, he was actually in the webinar too. So
he's trying to rejoin. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you all.
Right.
It's been really great, and I feel like I should send everybody a cake or something, but we'll figure it out. Maybe some ADSA socks is what we'll be able to afford.
It's nice to see everyone again.
Yeah, nice to see you all. Take care.
All right. Bye.
You did great.
Oh, thanks. You did too. I even pronounced your name.
No, that was great. That was a very good show.
I mean, it's weird because when you go to do a tour of it, it seems so small, but we spent so much effort in
I know.
making such a small thing, but I guess that's okay.
But that at the same time, it was, I was thinking, wow, you thought about